I think we're live. That was
Oh, there we go.
There we go. Hey, everyone, welcome. I'm Scott Cohen from AGP Ventures in Boston, where the snow is coming down pretty heavily. And having just returned from Tel Aviv, I can tell you this is fairly depressing. But welcome, everyone, to our session with Adam Schouela, who's the head of emerging technology at the Fidelity Center for Applied Technology. If you don't know AGP, we're an early stage venture fund that invests exclusively in Israeli startups. We're based in Boston and Tel Aviv, and our mission is to connect Israeli founders to the US market. And one of the ways we do that is by connecting Israeli entrepreneurs to executives in the US like Adam, that we have relationships with. We like to say that just like Israeli founders have their networks through Shimona Matayim and Talpiot and Sayat Matkal, we also have our networks. They're different networks, but they tend to be with senior corporate executives in the US who we know, like, and trust, and who in some cases we've known for decades. So we're honored to have one of those with us today in Adam Schouela, who's the head of emerging technology at the Fidelity Center for Applied Technology, or FCAT as it's known. Adam has been with Fidelity for a decade and previously was doing similar applied technology work for the private investment arm of Fidelity. And before that, his own startup. So Adam, first, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So folks, I'm going to kick off some questions to Adam, but we're actually here to get your questions answered, not mine. So pose any questions in the comments field and we'll get them answered as we go. So Adam, first, like for the Israelis who may not know, like give us the basics about Fidelity Investments.
So at a high level, Fidelity Investments is financial services institution. It has, let's say, probably it has lots of businesses internally within Fidelity, but it has three main businesses. It has a personal investing business, or a retail business, which basically gives like brokerage services and financial services solutions to Americans and basically people across the U.S. and not just Americans. So I would say primarily people across the U.S. as well as some in Canada and a little bit elsewhere. It also has our workplace investing business, which is basically, think of like retirement accounts as well as like benefits for company benefits and that sort of stuff, and record keeping. So that's a whole other large significant business within Fidelity, as well as our institutional business. So we do provide a number of different services to registered investment advisors that are not Fidelity associates, but are providing those types of services to their clients. So those are three main areas. But Fidelity also has private equity, as I was in that world before I was in this world, as well as venture and other lots and lots of different types of businesses, and I've had the pleasure of participating in a lot of those different ones, everything from a tomato farm to a hotel to all different types of interesting companies to be able to work with.
Yeah, so earlier in my career, back when I had more hair and it wasn't so gray, I actually spent some time at Fidelity Capital, so I know how big Fidelity can be. And yes. So what about your group? What's the Fidelity Center for Applied Technology?
So Fidelity Center for Applied Technologies is meant to be sort of that tip of the spear and looking into both the technology trends as well as the socioeconomic trends that have that potential to impact both Fidelity, our associates, as well as our customers. So what I mean by that, in particular in my role, right, we're looking, let's say, 3 to 5 years out, what are those technologies that have that potential to disrupt or change the way that we do things, right? Or our customers do things. And so we have a group internally within FCAT, which is just purely research. So they're scouring the globe, looking for all of these different technologies as well as socioeconomic trends. And some of my areas, what we do is we take a lot of those signals and technologies and all that sort of stuff, and we get hands-on practical understanding and learnings from those technologies, right? So we build lots and lots and lots of different proofs of concepts to better understand what the potential of those technologies are. So I'll give a quick example. Like if you're in the blockchain space, for example, you might read a white paper. What is written in the white paper is not always what was implemented in code, right? So we are really truly looking to understand what the potential of that technology is, and what can it do. And then, of course, we want to be able to apply it to the business, right? So we're matching these new technologies, right, with all the different business use cases that are floating by, with all the different business units that we're working with, and seeing where do those technologies, what are those unique characteristics that these technologies have, and how might they be able to disrupt or be used or leveraged internally within the firm.
So, I mean, this may be a stupid question, but like, why applied technology? It's a weird turn of phrase as opposed to, emerging technology or advanced technology. Like, why applied?
The applied really goes towards, it's not just looking for the cool stuff, right? My portfolio of technologies is everything from augmented and virtual reality to quantum computing to blockchain and all those different types of, like, all the headline things that you're going to see like in the newspapers and that sort of stuff. However, it's not just about finding the cool, and interesting technologies. It is about how do those technology, like, it's the application of those technologies. It's what are those unique characteristics of these technologies that have that potential to change things, and then we go build and apply those technologies to the business, right? It's not just about looking for the cool things. It's about, like, really truly what are those things that have that potential to change the way that we do what we do.
Got it. All right. So you've touched on this a little bit, but your title is head of emerging technology. So, like, what does that mean? What's your portfolio?
So I have, I mentioned a little bit of my portfolio before. So again, everything from augmented and virtual reality and all the stuff basically that needs to, all the infrastructure and all that sort of stuff that needs to exist in order for, the ability to implement a technology like that internally within a company like Fidelity. So everything from edge compute and all that sort of stuff, all the different types of human computer interfaces that there might be, whether it's gesture or voice or all that sort of stuff. All that sort of stuff is in one group. We did have another group which was actually the quantum computing group started off in that group as well. But as we started to find more and more applicability of that technology to the firm, we actually spun that group out to be a separate group in and of itself, and that group has been growing over the last little while. So that's another area. And then a third area is around a lot of the blockchain work that we do. So we have a blockchain incubator, and then we have a number of different companies or different groups that have spun out of the blockchain incubator, such as we have a crypto data product that has launched out of the incubator, which looks at which basically makes crypto data accessible to anybody who is looking to be able to understand what's going on in the crypto world. So we have a whole broad I have a whole broad suite of different technologies. There are other groups internally within FCAT as well. There's an AI group. There's a sort of a next gen trading group that's looking at all different types of technologies in that space as well.
So, I mean, you've touched on a bunch broadly. Could you give us some examples of maybe some specifics around some of these sectors, that kind of areas where you're playing, either in blockchain or AR or some of the other kind of more specific examples to kind of bring these things to life?
Sure. I'm going to go, I will do that, but I'm going to go back a little bit in history because to talk to, even why our group exists at all, right? So our group has been around for a really, really long time, especially when it comes to, from a labs perspective. We were born in 1999, right? And if you think about what are the types of things that were happening at that time, it was Y2K. How do you change 2 digits to 4 digits? And, needing to spend millions and millions of dollars in order to be able to do that. And really not wanting to ever be in that position again. So how do you create a group that's forward-looking, that is looking to basically see these things coming in the future, so that we're able to not be reactive to these things, and we could be a little bit more proactive. Another thing at that particular time was the birth of e-commerce, right? And being able to do how does Fidelity how does Fidelity look online? What is that interaction? How is Fidelity represented in this e-commerce space? So these were some of those original projects that existed. Now what we're doing, if I was to look at, even something from like the blockchain space, we're trying to be able to do those same things, right? If you look at, at the core, what is blockchain, right? Blockchain is a ledger that's online that gives, that basically removes a broker, and people are able to, it's a great record keeper. It gives people the ability to exchange tokens or any of those types of things. And what's, like, when we're looking at this, like, what's the impact of something like this to, Fidelity, which is a broker and a record keeper and all those different types of things? So how do we look at this technology and understand how to leverage it for our business as opposed to being displaced by it, right? So that's when we're looking at all these different types of basically applications of these different technologies. So one of the companies that has actually spun out of FCAT it's still a Fidelity company. It's Fidelity Digital Assets, and this is basically a crypto custodian for institutions. So this they're able to hold Bitcoin as well as ETH, but really truly a institutional grade custodian for crypto, and that is one of those types of projects that came out of our lab. And then today we're working on all different types of things. So there was, if I was to go to augmented and virtual reality, for example, we built a virtual reality training application for our contact center associates, for the people that are on the phones and answering phones for our associates. So we saw years ago that virtual reality is an incredible, like, that unique characteristic. It's an incredible empathy transfer tool for being able to, again, transfer empathy. So how can we leverage that unique characteristic internally within Fidelity? And we thought, well, we have a whole, there's a large portion of our contact center associates who are younger, just graduated college, that sort of, age group, and life experience. And then you have a large portion of Fidelity's customers who are retirees. So how can we generate empathy for the customer using this particular technology? So what we did was we brought, if you're a brand new contact center associate, you put on a virtual reality headset and you're in a contact center. So this might be your first time in a contact center and you're in a virtual environment. And then what happens is you'll take the call from the customer, but you'll get transported into the customer's home, virtually, and not a real customer, but you'll get transported into the customer's home to get a sense of the context of why they're calling Fidelity for that one particular, instance. Then you'll go back into the contact center, have that conversation with the customer. We built it as sort of like a choose your own adventure, but now with some of these new technologies, we might be able to even expand that. But the ability to have that interaction with the customer, then hang up with the customer and go back into the customer's home to see the impact of that transaction that you had. And depending upon how you handled that transaction, you might see one outcome or another, right? And being able to experience these things, right, and give people that real life experience was a tremendous, opportunity for us. So that was one of the examples of or a few of the different examples of things that we've built.
That's cool. So we're starting to get some questions in. Thanks everyone for submitting questions. Adam, one of them is around what you just talked about, which is the output. So is the preferred output from FCAT, are they pilots and prototypes that lead to kind of internally used technologies? Are they pilots and prototypes that lead to kind of companies that are spun out of the business? Like, what's the preferred output?
The preferred output is whatever delivers value to the firm as a whole, right? So there is everything from research reports, right, like written words or whatever that might be able to give insight to the business, all the way through to proofs of concepts that help articulate what the potential of these different new technologies might be, and how that might impact the firm, right? In order to be able to have them think a little bit differently, all the way through to products that could transition into the firm as a whole, or products that could leave the firm and as standalone entities. So it really is the full gamut of potential outcomes. The other value is we built something that doesn't work, right? And then the learning is the savings of like, no, we've been there, don't do that. It's not going to produce the outcomes that you're looking for, right? So it really truly is that full gamut of potential output for these things.
Got it. So I want to get to how, there's a lot of Israeli startups who are listening to this. So that was who the primary audience is. I'm sure they're interested in like how they could work with Fidelity and FCAT, which I want to get to. But before I do that, I just want to step back and just ask you a question around, like, you referenced how long FCAT has been around. And I'm curious to hear like what you think the secret of its success is. And I ask this because we've seen a lot of technology labs set up by companies, Disney, Citigroup, Humana, Visa, get launched and then shut down. And you guys have been around for almost a quarter century and are thriving and growing. And you've mentioned to me that there's now there's Fidelity Labs and there's the Fidelity Center for Applied Technology. Like, what's the secret to the success of Fidelity's kind of lab strategy?
I think there's probably a few little secrets and then probably one large one. Number one, Fidelity is a private company, right? So it has a lot more, I would say, flexibility, maybe even patience for these types of things. Fidelity is also known as taking a contrarian view for a lot of these different types of things. So that ability to just experiment and try, even when it's not necessarily the fad or the thing to be doing, right? It really does embrace that contrarian view. But at the end of the day, I think the main reason why this place has thrived and has survived as long as it has is there has been a commitment from the from the senior leadership at Fidelity to do this for all of this time, right? It is we've been through many booms and busts, right? And in downturns, Fidelity doubles down, right? And we get that ability to to really dig in and explore all of these different different opportunities, regardless of whatever the market conditions might be or anything along those lines. So that the private company plus that real true commitment from the senior executive team of making sure that this stuff thrives and survives is probably it. Plus the fact that we've had a lot of there's been a lot of output over the years from the stuff that we've done. So I'm sure that probably doesn't hurt.
Right, that's great. Good point. All right, so let's talk about startup interaction with FCAT. There's a lot of Israeli startups that would probably love to have Fidelity as a pilot customer or do a prototype with you guys. So A, do you guys work with startups, and B, how?
So we absolutely work with startups. We work with startups in a variety of different ways. Everything from bringing startups in to showcases and different things like that, which we host internally within the firm, to share what's going on and spark ideas internally within the firm with the senior leadership across the firm. So that's like I would say the lightest touch way of being able to share and show some of those innovative ideas that might turn into a trial or something along those lines. But we often, we run the range of all different types of engagements ourselves internally within FCAT. So everything from basically building PoCs. So one of my jobs is translating technologies into something that is relatable internally within the firm. Sometimes when you have a pitch, right, and you have a piece of paper, you have a website that's presenting an idea, sometimes it's hard for people to be able to understand what that idea is and how that idea really is truly going to impact them. So a lot of the times what we do is we'll build these proofs of concepts, in particular with startups, in order to be able to translate that potential that this idea has in a way that is relatable to the business. So instead of just sort of some of them are easy, right? Like it's a startup in the financial services industry. A lot of the senior executives will get it, right, and just sort of run with it, right, because they've seen some of these things before and it's relatable. Other ones, I'll give you the example, even virtual reality, right? Like, what is virtual reality? What does, zombie apocalypse, right, have to do with financial services? Why are these two things even remotely together, right? And it's not until you try some of these things that you have that realization that, oh, now I get it. And I'll, give the virtual reality example. Like, I've had tons of conversations, right, with senior executives within the firm about virtual reality. And people like, I understand virtual reality. I tried it, a few years ago, or all that sort of stuff. But then I'll have them come down to the lab, try it themselves, and before they'll start telling me all the different things that how they believe that this technology is going to impact what they do. But then they come down to the lab and they try it. And what will happen is they'll actually put on the headset or the latest versions of things. And then they'll try it like off the shelf stuff, or they'll try some of the things that we've built. And pretty much every single time what happens is they'll take off the headset and apologize and say, forget everything that I told you beforehand. I had no idea really truly what was possible with this technology. I now have to go away and think about it. But that's when we start getting, it's how do we make these technologies relatable so that we get to those really truly impactful use cases, right? And when we work with different startups, that's what we're trying to be able to get to, is how do we translate the product that you have into something that is relatable, that we know is going to be relatable internally within the firm. We might have to shop it around, but as you had said, Fidelity is very, very large. We have lots of different places where we can place it, right? So how do we make these technologies relatable in such a way that people see that potential and then want to be able to do more with it and take it further and those types of things. So we build with different proofs of like with different startup companies, and we'll try those. We'll try those things. We'll also in certain cases, like give out our feedback to them, and even build a specific version of whatever they have with us. But there's all different types of ways of engaging. Or we'll take or the startup has like one missing piece, right? It might not be the product or whatever they're pitching, right? But there's one piece within that product that is unique that would complement something else that we have internally, and then we might work with the startup to try to figure out how might we be able to either productize it or work together in order to be able to bring something like that to the market.
And what's the firm's posture like in terms of kind of interactivity? What I mean is, there's some financial services firms that we've talked to who are very specific about what they are looking for and need. They're kind of like, we're thinking about X. Don't talk to us unless you are X. And then there are other firms who are kind of more kind of open to hear different ideas and things that may not be kind of on their radar screen. Like, what, generally speaking, how do you guys think about, inbound versus, kind of being very directive and the stuff that's like, for example, in your portfolio?
Yeah, so I'm very open. The way that I look at what we do is Fidelity is an incredibly customer-centric organization, right? Everything that they do is in order to be able to make is for the customer, essentially, at the end of the day. That said, my area is maybe one step removed from that, but on purpose. So I'm potentially a little bit more technology centric, but my goal is how do I start building up the toolbox, right? I have a toolbox that we're basically filling up with all different types of tools in order for us to be able to figure out those use cases where when that use case comes up, we have a tool now that we're able to address, right? We have that particular use case, right? So we have tons and tons and tons of use cases that are constantly going by us, right? And we're building up this toolbox. So how do we just continually apply all these different new tools to all the use cases that are going by? I don't always know what's the next use case that's going to come by. So we're always looking for what are the what are the new ideas and tools that we might be able to use to fill up that toolbox. Now, the catch is that in certain cases, especially since we're looking, let's say 3 to 5 years out or something along those lines, is that sometimes we might find a tool that we think is particularly interesting, but it takes a little bit of time before the business catches up, right? So, we're patient from that perspective, but I do also understand that sometimes from a startup perspective, right? There's sometimes an imbalance in the time scale as to when they want to be able to do things and when the business is ready to be able to do things, right? And there's sometimes there is that imbalance.
Sure.
But in general, right, I am always open to looking at interesting and new ideas and concepts and things like that.
And just from, I'm already getting a couple of texts about this, like from mechanics point of view, like what's the best on ramp? I mean, Fidelity, you got like 50,000 employees, probably more than that. There's the Center for Applied Technology, which we've been talking about. There's Fidelity Labs, which Mona Vernon runs, which is different. So like, if you're a startup in Herzliya or Tel Aviv, like what's the best on ramp besides emailing me and saying, hey, will you introduce me to Adam?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. We have a bunch of people out of the ecosystem also, right? So a lot of the times it is sort of getting in anywhere, right? So like if I see something that is interesting, it doesn't fit for some of the stuff that I do, right? But I know somewhere else internally within the firm, again, I've been at the firm for the past 16 years or so, or something along those lines, right? So I have a broad network internally within Fidelity. My best interest is in, helping the firm as a whole, right? So I'm going to constantly be, sharing, these different technologies or ideas or concepts or companies to lots of different areas, right? So, we've even seen biotech. The other thing, though, is a lot of times, which is why I actually, what a lot of times startups come to me with, and they'll pitch the idea very, very much in the financial like with what they believe is a financial services use case, where I actually almost like not the financial services use case ones, right? Because the financial services use case ones I've usually seen like over and over and over and over again. It's where, because of the way that we look at different companies and different technologies, we're looking at those unique characteristics where this technology or this use case is again different, right, from everything else, where we might be able to apply it in a way that you haven't necessarily, you as a startup haven't necessarily thought of yet. Right. So a great example is we saw a company that was working on an algorithm for truck routing. Well, what does that have to do with Fidelity? Right. But believe it or not, it does. Right. So but those types of companies aren't necessarily going to know or realize that this is something that would be valuable. Right. So my aperture is, I would say, particularly wide because I know financial services, right? I know Fidelity, and I know how some of these different technologies and ideas have that potential of impacting, a firm like ours, especially if it works for a different industry, right? If it works for a different industry, then the odds of it working for, ours, potentially with a little tweak or two, has a higher chance of working, right? As opposed to if it is just something, completely fresh and net new, right? So I would say my aperture is potentially wider than most in this space.
Yeah, I mean, dude, that's a unique. I mean, most financial services firms don't have that approach. So like that's I think very special and unique. and maybe the secret sauce of Fidelity a little bit. But so can I ask what mistakes companies usually make when pitching Fidelity? I mean, you just mentioned one, which is why I'm thinking about it, which is don't think just about financial services, but like, are there other errors or mistakes that companies should think about avoiding when talking to you guys?
Yeah, so I mean, another one is we touched this a little bit, is the idea of like timelines, right? Sometimes sometimes timelines don't necessarily always add up, so or match perfectly, right? Or meet the the speed at which so startups move at an incredible rate, and often I wish I was in that world in order to be able to get that level of speed, which is really 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 fun and exhilarating and all that sort of stuff. And sometimes as you get closer and closer and closer to, let's say, the core of a financial institution, your speed slows. There's very, very good reason for a lot of this stuff, right? But everything from priorities to how systems interact with each other and all that sort of stuff, right? It takes a little bit of time. So that's sort of one caution that I would have. The other one though is, especially in a firm like Fidelity, right? We might have standard system or like standard name brand systems, right? However, the implementation of that system is more likely than not anything but standard, right? So if someone says, "Oh, it's easy, you have this system, no problem. You have," picking a random one, regardless of whether or not we have it or not. But you have Salesforce, no problem. Like, we have a widget that fits into Salesforce, that it's the best widget since sliced bread, and it's super easy to be able to implement. I will guarantee you that if we have Salesforce, or if we have XYZ system, right, the implementation is likely not a standard implementation, so it is not always the easiest thing in order to be able to do that. The other thing is, I remember there was one company that I was working with, and they're like, "Oh, no problem. We were trying to do the install into of their thing, and they're like, "Oh, just get us your network guy and open a port," right? Those are the types of, like, number one, there is no real just network guy, right? There's every last little thing is because it is so complex, it's very, very, very distributed amongst many groups, right? And it's not always it's not always just as simple as just open a port, right? Like it's much more complicated than that most of the time.
Right. So look, for everyone listening, first of all, I'm going to get to your question. We only scheduled to go for another 15 minutes or so. So I'm going to get to everyone's questions, but just you've just kind of heard from Adam, kind of what his portfolio is, what he's thinking about, and kind of what not to do when pitching him in Fidelity. And Adam's kind of offered to be a little guinea pig in a little interactive experiment we're going to do here, which is, if you send me your pitch, we will pick a few and send them to Adam for his consideration. So send me your pitch to scott@avivgrowth.com, and we'll take a look this week and see if it merits to get passed off to Adam. So again, send your pitch to scott@avivgrowth.com. We'll help to try to broker an intro. And Adam, thanks for being the guinea pig in this little test. So we've got a bunch of questions I want to throw out from the listeners, and we'll try to get to as many as we can before we're at the end of this in like 11 minutes or so. But first is your thoughts on GPT, and how Fidelity is thinking about deploying kind of generative AI.
Yeah, so Chat GPT is definitely a hot topic everywhere, including I would say internally within Fidelity. There's only or whether it's ChatGPT in particular or large language models, something along those lines, right? So it is a technology that is incredibly interesting, right? And one of the things that, especially when you're looking at some of these technologies, or the reason why FCAT even exists, right, is looking at and exploring these different technologies. And especially where you have Fidelity customers, right, that are interacting with other companies, right, in or having these different experiences, right, with whether it's a chatbot or something else along those lines, and they're having incredible experiences on one side, and then come to Fidelity. The expectation is that the experience is going to be similar to at least something else that they've done. So we are definitely exploring that. The issue, though, is that number one, Fidelity is one of the design constraints, I like to call it, around Fidelity, is that Fidelity is a regulated entity, right? So we have government oversight, especially with the things that an associate is allowed to be able to tell or speak to a customer. Now, something like a large language model or ChatGPT is a black box. And just because it's a black box doesn't make, and it's difficult to test or difficult to predict as to what they might say, doesn't give us, doesn't absolve us, is probably a better word, from the responsibility of what is coming out of these models. So even something as what looks so amazing as something like a ChatGPT has to be, it most certainly has to be explored, and we certainly have to come up with a solution. But it becomes a far more complicated problem or experience to be able to deliver in a regulated environment like this, right? I use ChatGPT. We were just recently on vacation. I have young daughters. I read to my daughters every night, and I ran out of books, right? Like the chapter book ended, and I needed a bedtime story. So I went to ChatGPT. It's perfect, garbage in, garbage out type of model. We got amazing bedtime stories, out of ChatGPT. But those are not regulated, right? The government isn't going to say that I'm giving advice to my children that is, potentially poor advice when it talks about football players and unicorns, right? However, when it comes to financial advice and those types of things, it might seem interesting, right? And it might seem right or something along those lines. And it is incredibly confident in how it presents its information that, we have to be a little bit careful, and we have to do a little bit more diligence in that area in order to be able to come up with the right model.
Totally. Yeah. The fun of innovating in a highly regulated industry.
Design constraints.
Yeah, totally. So there's a question here about ESG and ESG data, specifically whether Fidelity portfolio managers and or customers are starting to ask for ESG data as part of the decision-making process.
Sure. So ESG has been, again, this is not necessarily exactly in my wheelhouse. However, I do know that there, through the labs, this has come up a number of times, and I do know that there have been products that have come out of the lab and have gone into the business around ESG. A few years ago, we did an augmented reality data visualization of your portfolio and how you might be able to augment your portfolio or swap out individual investments with ESG investments, and looking at it from the perspective of investment characteristics, right? If I have an investment that has these particular characteristics, but I want to replace it with an ESG one, can I find one that has similar characteristics? So there are definitely products within the firm that, when we know the customers were asking for it, and we know that there have been things in that space.
There's a question here about going back to your comments on blockchain, whether you've actually implemented something with using blockchain.
So Fidelity has been in the blockchain space since about 2015. So there have been a number, there have been many different projects, as well as, Fidelity Digital Assets is a custody solution that Fidelity has, and there's certainly blockchain involved in that. At one point, years and years ago, people, well, not years and years ago, but we were, you were able to use Bitcoin in the cafeteria to buy pizza and stuff like that. So that's one area. We also helped Fidelity Charitable. So Fidelity has a large charitable organization, and the ability to be able to accept crypto is something else that we've done. But we have also looked at all different types of just true straight blockchain implementations of technologies as well, right? But again, in this particular case, looking for where it's appropriate to be able to use blockchain as opposed to a database, right? Like really truly understanding what those use cases are and how you might be able to implement them. I will say, actually, blockchain has been an interesting way of collaborating with third-party companies as well, as opposed to trying to be able to get into, through firewalls and, into APIs. Being able to collaborate over, a public blockchain has been an interesting avenue for us as well.
So I think we got time for two more questions. A friend of mine I met in Israel 2 weeks ago just texted me WhatsApp and asks about kind of where are you in the journey on quantum?
That's a great question. So we've been doing quantum computing for the last few years. So we're at the point where we are looking at how quantum computers have that potential of impacting, what we do. So quantum computers are fundamentally different from our classical computers, like whether it's a phone or punch cards or anything along those lines, right? They operate fundamentally differently. So one of the things that we have been looking at over the last little while is, because they operate so fundamentally differently, how do algorithms change, right? And what are these different technologies? What are they good at, right? So everything from looking at simulations, looking at optimizations. These are all things that quantum computers are fundamentally have the potential of being better than classical computers, and so we've definitely explored that space. We've also explored it from a post-quantum security, as well as just networking and all of those, that whole area as well. So we have a team that is dedicated internally to Fidelity that is looking at these different things. So I think last week we just published another paper on state preparation for quantum computers, right? So there's definitely a lot of work that is being done in that space.
Great. All right. So last question. This is from a CEO of a fintech in Tel Aviv. She says she was looking at top fintech trends for 2020, and open banking was at the top of the list, which I guess about leveraging APIs that allow third-party developers to create apps and stuff around. I assume that's what open banking is. Like, did that ever happen? Is that a thing?
So one thing that Fidelity is actually not a bank. So I'm not sure that I can comment on that. However, there are a ton of fintechs, right? And there are a ton of there are few back ends and there are many front ends, right? And having all different types of front ends is great because there's all different types of customers, right? And different customers want that customization for their specific type. So the ability to provide all those back ends, or the ability to provide the back end systems with a front end on top that is customized for different customer segments, I think is definitely a great thing.
Cool. So look, I think this is all we have time for. So this was fantastic. Adam, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having me. Hope this was helpful.
It was great. Stay warm, stay out of the snow.
You too.
Everyone, just as a reminder, you've been listening to Adam Schouela, Head of Emerging Technology at the Fidelity Center for Applied Technology. I'm Scott Cohen from AGP Ventures. Look, we got live streams coming up with many more executives. We've got the head of Hyundai's robotics and R&D group, which is making walking cars that go upstairs. We got the head of digital NFL coming up, the head of store design at Amazon Fresh, who's doing some crazy things with checkout and pickup and return technology, the head of clinical strategy at Walmart's kind of secret healthcare skunkworks called Store Number 9. and others. So if you'd like to join any of these in the future, just get on our list or email access@avivgrowth.com, and we'll make sure you hear about what's on the calendar. So I guess that concludes this live stream. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, Lee Tribe. Thanks again, Adam.
Thank you.